All right, guys, welcome back to Marriage with the Rocks.
Welcome back.
It's been a while.
It is.
So we thought we needed like a week or so to figure out what we were talking about next. But before we get to today's topic, I want to talk about our new fireplace room. It's not new. We've always had it. The fireplace hasn't worked for 4 years.
But he finally got it fixed.
I had a fireplace guy come out. I'm like, hey, man, I got the fireplace going. I just need an opinion as to whether I'm going to kill my family if I run the fireplace. And he's
There's
like,
still a little smell.
yeah, he's like, I think you're okay. So we'd love to have you join us sometime.
Oh, so welcome.
Yeah, so we're talking about comparison today.
So yeah, we picked this topic and it has taken a while to just decompress or just think about it. And so here we are.
Yeah, we're going to jump into
here.
it. Before we get to really dig into it, Andrea's going to talk about her story with comparison a little bit. But we thought we'd start with comparing something that we both have. We both have cars. Let's compare how we take care of our cars.
Or should we compare? Let's open up the car. What does your console look like?
Like if I open up my console?
Yeah.
There's many napkins in there. There's some ibuprofen.
Clean? Oh, yep.
They're not dirty napkins.
Well,
I don't throw dirty napkins in there.
Where do you put your garbage?
Under my seat. Where else do you put? Like, I don't want it to get in the way of like my pushing the pedal.
You put the garbage in the door so that when you get out of the car, you put the garbage away.
Little does Andrea know, many times I have taken trash out of the door of her car.
That's because true. It's your trash.
No, that was your trash. But my car's much messier.
Okay.
So jumping into comparison today, Andrea's going to share a little bit about her story with comparison in our marriage, kind of in parenting, kind of overall.
So just have taken this last week to reflect and dig a little deeper with this topic. So I'm going to share 2 lies and 1 truth about comparison. Yeah. And so I'm going to start with the lies and I'll end with the truth.
Smart.
So the first lie that I believed that comparison just was teaching me at a young age, like when we first got married, is just that there's a right way to do pretty much everything.
Anything, right?
Anything.
It's America. Isn't there always a right way to do something?
Or, yeah, there's, you can YouTube it.
That is true.
And so that was a lie that I look back and early on, like I think about kind of how it started was probably within having kids.
Right.
And just parenting. And I remember that was the one thing I'm like, I loved reading books about raising kids and parenting. And I remember this one specific moment. And I followed those books. Like
she did follow those books. To your credit, in a really good way.
Yeah, thank you.
And so, like, yeah, you were.
And I mean, you have to pick and choose from the books, but they definitely gave some really good insight. And I always think information is good. Information is good, but when you then think that that is the one right way to do something, then it can kind of become a dark side.
Yeah.
So I'm on the farm with my 2 little girls at the time, and I grew up on a farm where, we would just run outside. You didn't have to grab shoes. Like, you could run barefoot and just play. You just go outside. And so there was this one moment where I'm getting my 2 daughters ready to go outside. And nowadays you put your sunscreen on, and then they both had to have their bucket hats. And by golly, sunglasses. At the age of 2 and 4, they needed their sunglasses. Yeah. And I did this because I had friends that I respected and looked up to. And as new moms, like, this is just something that we were all doing. And I thought that's what a good mom does. And that's the right way to send your kids outside. And then to my mom's credit, she just kind of stopped and looked at me and she's like, I can look back and laugh now, but she just looks at me and she goes, this is kind of taking the fun out of going outside. And I'm like, valid. And that was one moment that I remember changing and being like, it's okay. It's okay if I let my kid go outside and by golly, I forgot to put the sunscreen on.
By golly.
I said, by golly, I'm not a bad mom. So that was one time.
But it's really easy, especially in parenting. Like, we did this grace-based parenting class. And to your credit, like, you were so intentional with our girls growing up and use that in such a good way. The enemy's smart, though, right? Anything that's good, he can pervert. And so it can get to the point oh, you did something good, like you're being intentional. You're not quite intentional enough. You got to do a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more, and that can
Mm-hmm.
get really insidious really fast.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So now an example that I thought of just in this lie that I believed with there's right living. There's one right way to do something is then within our marriage. And I remember
yeah,
as a young couple, like we just had our starter home and then, all your friends are getting married and then you just watch and like we do a lot of observing. And so you would watch your friends or your family and it's just that oh like what does a successful marriage look like? Well, in my head I started to
right,
just watch people and there's one right way to do it, right? And so if that's the way I am measuring it, well then okay, there's a time then that you get your next house because
yeah.
you
You got
you
to move on
you
from
got
your
to move on
starter
from your
home.
starter
Starter
home
home.
and then you get the next and cars maybe,
Yeah,
but I mean you have to start having a family whatever, but then there's toys and then it's like what things are your kids involved in and then for us financially, right, it's like oh
yeah,
where are you at x financially,
yeah.
where are
We
you
were
at?
at a different spot
And
than
we were always at a
a
different
lot of
spot,
people
we were always at a different spot than a lot of people
around us,
and so i
or at
i
least that's what we noticed. I don't know that that's
that's true,
necessarily true,
yeah.
but that's what it felt like to us,
And
right?
so then I would put that on our marriage isn't successful, or we're not doing this
Yeah,
right because we're not meeting these, what would you call that? These milestones in a marriage.
yeah, those markers.
So,
Yeah,
so that's something I noticed
and for
that I brought
you,
into our marriage because
yeah,
I was like, oh well, we got to do it the right way.
yeah. And as we were talking about this today, it's not so much that you, and there maybe was a little bit of coveting in that, like, oh, I want this or I want that, but that chiefly wasn't the thing. It was far
Mm-hmm.
more like, oh, I've failed,
Mm-hmm. Well,
and
because when you,
I'm not winning like they're winning or something
yeah,
like that.
when you have the mindset of that there's a right way to do something,
Yeah,
if it doesn't end up the way you want it to go, then you failed at
yeah. So the first lie is there's a right way to do
it. Mm-hmm.
something. What was the second lie?
And then with that, then the fallback was just this thought of I'm not good enough and
Right.
I never will be good enough because I'm not making the mile
Yeah.
markers in name it, and I could tell you like
Yeah.
what I wasn't living up to, let alone our marriage wasn't showing
Yeah.
the world.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah. And I think that's, again, is a really dangerous place to be because it goes from simply like, oh, there's a right way to do things. And if you look at that on its face, that's not bad necessarily by
Mm-hmm.
itself. But when that next part comes in, that I'm not good enough,
Mm-hmm.
that's really dangerous
Yeah.
for anybody. And that's, I don't think it comes from comparison for me, but that is a constant struggle for me of like, Brian, you don't measure up, you're not good enough. And that's a really, really tough spot to be.
Mm-hmm.
And opposite of what God says, by the way.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think like as I've kind of reflected this last week on that, like I have just noticed it in a lot of different areas of my life.
Yeah.
And so it's claiming that these are lies that the enemy wants me to believe and wants like me to bring into my marriage.
Yeah.
And
So that's been a struggle for you. Has there ever been a time where you're like, oh, things shifted for me?
mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking about okay, when did this idea of right living, when did it get flipped? And I was thinking about when we took our kids to Paraguay.
Yep.
And when we went down to Paraguay, I just saw life being lived in a completely different way that was actually
Yeah.
quite freeing.
Yeah. And we were
Uh,
on a mission trip with the church,
mm-hmm,
and so it wasn't just the four of us in Paraguay, but went to and met a family that runs a mission there.
mm-hmm,
But it was a very different experience. Everything looks different in Paraguay. Their lawns are very different than
yeah.
ours. Their houses
They
look,
just live life differently,
yeah,
and so they're what they would deem as what success looks like is so different than up
yeah.
here in America.
What they value is very
Mm-hmm,
different. And
mm-hmm.
so, how did that change things for you?
I just remember coming home and almost just I had a conversation with a good friend of mine too about like what this right living just steals the joy
Yeah,
out of your life, and how when that gets named, when you can name that and when you can just say, hey, this is not of God, it started to become freeing.
yeah,
However, um, then it became more of a self-reflective process, and it has taken years of a lot of internal work, and continually I was just
Yeah. And will continue to be work,
yeah,
right? It's not like,
because it's just something I know that if I let go, like if I let those thoughts go, it'll sneak back and it claims me. So
yeah, that comparison does.
mhm,
Yeah. And that was, I mean, we went there in 2016, I think. And so that's
mhm,
been 8 years now, over 8 years ago. Um, so those are the two lies.
mhm.
How about the truth?
Yeah. So then I was just thinking about okay, what does Jesus say about comparison, and just what does he say to me? And the one truth that he says to me that just kind of knocks the two lies out of the park is just reminding me that I'm enough. And so he looks at me, and
Yeah,
this is hard sometimes for me to say out loud,
yeah, but
um,
it's true.
but it's him just looking at me and saying, okay, you may not have this, or you may not be at this point, but you are enough.
Yeah,
And do you trust me with what you have? And so that's the encouragement that I just want to give to all of you, is that you are enough. You are created in God's image for his purpose and his plan, and you are enough. You are his beloved.
yeah,
And I've had to tell myself that. And I think over this last week, like there's just been some raw moments of this realization a little bit more.
yeah. Yeah, we've really thought about this and
Mm-hmm.
talked about it probably more than we've ever talked about it. There was a couple of verses
Mm-hmm.
that you wanted to bring in.
Yeah, and so one of the verses that just kind of came to me was one from our, like I just think about back in church, was Psalm 51, 10 through 12, because I think when I have that comparison robbing my joy, I pray, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me, and cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. But that continually create in me a clean heart, O Lord,
Yeah,
and renew a right spirit within me. So, Lord, help me to see things the way you see things, and not the way I or the world.
and help you to see you rightly.
Yeah.
Like there's a right way to view you. I think one of the things that we're talking about, especially as we're thinking about, there's not a right way to do something necessarily. There is wisdom here. Like we're not saying, oh, all truth is the same. We're not
Mm-hmm.
saying there's many ways to God. There is still truth, and there is a Jesus is the only way. That is the right way. He says in John
Mm-hmm.
14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Mm-hmm.
No one comes to the Father but through me. So I just want to make sure that
I'm
we're,
glad you said that.
yeah, that we know that there is truth. That's in so many areas of our life. You don't have to do it this exact way, the way everybody else is doing it, so that it just builds this comparison of like, oh yeah,
There was one other verse I wanted to leave with you guys,
um,
and that is to know that you are enough. 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, but he, Jesus, said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. But I think that first part was just that good reminder that my grace is sufficient, meaning you are enough and I've got you.
he's enough, right? Like his grace is sufficient for you. It's
Mm-hmm.
enough for you. So here's the
Mm-hmm.
question for you to consider this week. Where does comparison sneak into your life?
Mm-hmm.
Think about that for yourself, and then talk about that as a couple. Anything else?
That's all I got.
That's enough for you. She's like, please
I'm
let me
done
be,
now.
yeah, please let me be done. Next time we'll talk about my story with comparison. It looks different, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but we'll talk about that next time. Thanks for joining us at our fireside chat.
Have a great week.
See you.